Then after that, I don't know, I kind of took to the road. I hit the road one day, the first day that I ever hit the highway, to be what's called a rambling man or a hobo or a tramp was in 1927.
Most of us are aware that in the past 2 years, the world has changed a lot. The rich have gotten richer, the environment is changing before our eyes, and workers' rights have begun to affect everyone on a daily basis. We are living through historical times, but much of the dialogue about our time seems to be focused on the few rich people rather than, the rest of the common people. One of the biggest disparities in dialogue that I see is the focus on things like Jeff Bezos' spaceship versus focus on the general strike happening in the US right now. This sort of disparity in dialogue is not really uncommon, however. Throughout history, historians have used a method called great man theory to tell their stories, and this theory includes using the stories and the life stories of just specific great men. This will probably be celebrities, politicians, or different leaders to tell the story of greater world history. So while great man theory would be a top-down perspective of history, a view of from the perspective of the common people would be a bottom-up view. In our time today, however, I think straying away from great man theory might be helpful. Focusing on the common person might give us a more productive view of history. And this isn't to say that great man theory is inherently wrong or bad. It's just that I don't think it's as helpful today in writing history or explaining history than a view from the perspective of, say, the working class. So in this video, I'll be comparing the 30s and 40s, the time of Woody Guthrie, to today. There are a lot of similarities between our time, including things like environmental change, political consciousness, and just general working class movements. And while this video may honestly slip a little bit into the theory of great man, I want to use Woody Guthrie as more of a mouthpiece for his time than, explaining his life story. As a folk singer, his job was to represent the people's voice. It was to make music for the common person and make relatable music in stories to the common person. So I think by looking at his lyrics, we can get a good idea of that. Now, this video will be a fun exercise in history, but it'll also teach us what is important about the working class.
Time had come when the river was there to cross, and everybody said, well, so long, it's been good to know you. Let her come.
Okay, so I want to give a quick bio of Woody Guthrie before we get too deep into anything, just so you can get a sense of who he was. Born on July 14th, 1912 in Okemah, Oklahoma, Woodrow Wilson Guthrie was the son of a somewhat successful real estate speculator. Woody's father achieved some success in owning properties, but he eventually lost it all due to accidental fires, the oil drying up, and the Dust Bowl. Woody lost his mom to Huntington's disease, and his father and sister both died in fires. Woody became sort of a vagabond in these years, until his music talent landed him a radio job in California. His career began in the late 30s, but most of his important work happened in the 40s. In California, he was a pivotal part of the Dust Bowl refugee, or Okie, community. He provided a voice for the community over the radio and in his newspaper column, Woody Says. While filling this role, Woody also became a voice for other refugees and immigrants from overseas and from Mexico. This all eventually transformed into Woody's undying support for workers' rights and human rights. He would go on to fight for unions across the country, and he would personally show up to rallies and strikes to play his songs. The next big phase of Woody's life was World War II. Woody was extremely opposed to fascism and denounced it at every opportunity he got. He joined up with the Merchant Marines during the war, and during this time he wrote songs in support of the working class who were fighting the battles and working in the factories. Many of the songs he wrote during this time were also hyper-focused on the war and ultimately focused on defeating fascism. And around this time in the 40s, Woody went from a niche micro-celebrity in certain regions to nationwide fame. Schools across the country began teaching "This Land Is Your Land" to young kids, and the song caught on really well in elementary schools. And after about a generation is what made Woody Guthrie a household name. Sadly, Woody never got to fully experience his own fame, because by the time his songs gained national recognition, he was beginning to lose bodily function to Huntington's disease. Huntington's still wasn't fully understood, and Woody spent the last 15 years of his life living in a hospital, slowly losing touch with his own body until he eventually died in 1967. In the 50s, while Woody was in the hospital, the Red Scare was in full effect, or in other words, McCarthyism. Woody and many of his fellow musicians were put on the FBI watch lists for their connection to workers' rights movements and to the Communist Party. Woody's good friend and fellow musician Pete Seeger was even brought before McCarthy's House Un-American Activities Committee under suspicion of being a communist. Woody did live long enough, however, to see the folk music revival of the 60s, and he couldn't participate, but people across the country were singing his songs in protest. Woody Guthrie in some ways passed down a torch to the next generation when a young Bob Dylan came to visit him in the hospital. Bob Dylan played some of his songs, including the Song to Woody, which he wrote for the occasion. The relationship they had isn't totally explained, but the symbolic bridge between generation is why this meeting is so famous. So this has been a really general overview of Woody's life, and in the video I'll get into some more specifics, but now onto the next topic, which is...
John Steinbeck talks about one end of the Dust Bowl, and that's the Oklahoma end of it, and other people talk about the Colorado and the New Mexico end of it. But if you want to find the very big middle of these dust storms, where they get the blackest and the thickest, where the wheat grows, the oil flows, and the farmer owes, well, you just go to Amarillo, Texas.
So in the 1930s, when Woody Guthrie was starting to break onto the music scene, there was a natural disaster happening in his home state. This disaster was called the Dust Bowl. So for those of you who don't know, the Dust Bowl was this period in the 30s where overfarming, droughts, and dust storms, actual storms of dust, turned Oklahoma, some parts of Texas, into this just unlivable wasteland. Sometimes the dust storms would block out the sun. They would destroy all the crops. It was just a terrible time to live there, and that's unfortunately where Woody Guthrie was living at the time. And during the Dust Bowl, around 500,000 Americans were displaced and had nowhere to go. The only thing that we know in recent history that's comparable to that is Hurricane Katrina, in which where 1.5 million people were actually displaced. And while both of these disasters are very different from each other inherently, there were similar repercussions in how they forced people to become essentially refugees in their own country. In America, climate change will always affect the working class before anybody else, and this hasn't really changed since the time of Woody Guthrie. Events like the Dust Bowl and like Hurricane Katrina disproportionately affected the working class, and in the case of Hurricane Katrina, disproportionately affected black people too. In both cases, common people were just sort of thrown around. They had no homes to go back to, and no jobs they could get, and they essentially just became totally disenfranchised people. There's plenty of pop culture out there that reflects the times that these people had and the struggles they went through. so I thought I'd list a couple of them here. First, we have the Dust Bowl Ballads by Woody Guthrie. Obviously, he, experienced the Dust Bowl firsthand, and this was a huge part of his life, and it kind of affected who he was. And these songs a lot of them sound similar. That's just how Woody is, but they really sort of reflect like the struggles that people were going through. Famous author John Steinbeck also has a book called The Grapes of Wrath, which I have never actually read, but it is always hailed as a classic. You see it everywhere. Schools probably have people reading it. We're more likely to recognize cultural references to events like Hurricane Katrina because Hurricane Katrina is just more recent in our cultural memory. One of the songs that I really enjoy that was about the tragedy is actually Tie My Hands by Lil Wayne. This song, I heard it when I was a kid and I didn't really know what it was about, but as the years have gone by, the song, makes me kind of emotional sometimes, and just the lyrics are really powerful. Another glimpse into the life of climate change refugees is the episode Invasion of the Katrinians of the show Boondocks, which you've probably heard of. This episode is really good. It shows all different aspects of, what happened when refugees would show up at like their friends' or relatives' house, looking for help. It showed the politics of what it was like to be a refugee, but also what it was like to be someone, receiving a refugee or in the position to help a refugee. It also shows the disregard and almost abandonment of some people, after Hurricane Katrina. This episode, coincidentally, also has Lil Wayne as a guest feature. He voices one of the characters, which is just an interesting example.
Right face to face with you, why, most people are pretty level-headed. They just said, well, this is the end. This is the end of the world. People ain't been living right. Human race ain't been treating each other right. Been robbing each other in different ways with fountain pens, guns, and having wars, and killing each other and shooting around. So, feller that made this world, he's worked up this dust storm.
In a world where climate change is creeping ever closer and closer to us, we all become more vulnerable by the day. In this picture right here, you can see a view from Mount Tom in western Massachusetts. My little brother took this photo, and what should have been a, bright and sunny day was totally clouded over from each end of the state. These clouds are actually clouds of ash. This is ash from the fires happening out west in Oregon, in California. And they actually blew across the entire country from the Pacific to the Atlantic. Pictures like these remind us of the apocalyptic pictures we saw of San Francisco last year, and they just remind us that climate change is happening, and it's happening to us, and it's creeping so close. On to protests.
And every time I saw hundreds and thousands of my relatives and the Okies, people from Oklahoma and Arkansas and Texas and New Mexico and Kansas that couldn't live in the drought and in the dust and in the conditions back down in there anymore. They owed more money to the banks than they could ever pay. So they just packed up what little goods they had and took out down the road.
So riding off the end of the Industrial Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the First World War, workers remained a really vulnerable class. However, during this time, different workers' movements were able to invigorate the working class and give them more power. Building off radical movements like the Seattle protest of 1919, workers of the 30s were able to successfully rally for change. workers successfully protested for things like higher pay, shorter work weeks, and overall better treatment. Getting this better treatment relied on solidarity. Cooperation was the name of the game. The way for workers to make actual change in their jobs was to organize through things like protests, unions, and strikes. Since labor organization was always rooted in the working class, music often reflected their struggles. This is ever present in Woody Guthrie's discography, as during this time he was totally committed to the idea of unionization. He has countless songs about unionization. Woody would actually play at different rallies. He would make songs for specific rallies. He would personally show up to protests and strikes. This, on top of his newspaper column Woody Says, and his collaboration with the Communist Party of the United States of America, we can see how involved Woody was in this whole process of unionization. And while Woody himself fought immensely for workers' rights, it was ultimately the workers that he sang to and the people that he reached out to who forced the change to happen. So while workers are indeed vulnerable, they are also really powerful. This same labor force of the 30s was the labor force that went on to win World War II. The working class of today is fighting a similar battle to the one of the 30s. People are still trying to get higher pay, shorter work weeks, and overall better treatment. And as I record this video, one of the biggest general strikes in US history is happening. This isn't just through organized protests and strikes, but through unorganized and untelevised walkouts and boycotts. Cornell University has a super good source when talking about strikes. I will post the link to this, but they have a strike tracker where you can see all the different strikes and protests happening in the US right now. Their guidelines for what counts as a protest and what counts as a strike is really good, because the main question they ask and the main thing they're looking for are, was it organized by workers? And other programs out there have really sort of strict guidelines for what counts and what isn't. So I find that Cornell University, we're probably getting the most accurate information from here. Their Twitter is also really useful. They're constantly retweeting, different protests that are happening currently. And every single month, they'll come out with a status of all the information for the previous month. And less organized struggles are happening like every day all around us. For example, if you drive down the highway or if you go to a shopping plaza, you will probably see some of these signs. Workers are just walking out to get better treatment somewhere else. And these signs will often be workers saying, we all quit, or the signs will look like the employers desperately trying to replace those employees who quit.
Employees of MFA Boston are on strike. The MFA union says their wages have been frozen for 2 years, and the museum refuses to guarantee any raise until 2024. They've also only offered less than a 2% increase. Since 2017, the director's salary has increased 38% to over $900,000, while staff salaries have only increased by 6%. One employee told me that she only takes home $21,000 a year after taxes, working 35 hours a week at the museum. What do you think? Do you support the MFA union strike?
So how this happened at my Wendy's. So I'm not going to tell you all the boring shit that led up to this, but basically what had happened was COVID happened, a couple months went by, everyone realized how shit it was, and everyone quit. I lost my AGM, my GM, and about 6 shift managers. I was a shift manager at the time, and after they all quit, I got promoted to an AGM. I had no GM for about 3 months, and I was working 85 hours a week, every week with no day off, basically them whole 3 months. And I made $14.77 as an AGM, keeping this store up and running. I eventually got a new GM. She came in and completely ruined this place within 2 weeks. The 34 people that I had on my schedule all basically wanted to quit. And I was just tired of it. No upper management helped me at all throughout those 3 months I was by myself. I did it all alone. And one day I just came in and I said I've had enough and I couldn't do it anymore. So I told everyone, and about me and 17 other people quit that day. We didn't clean up. We closed down about 8 o'clock at night. We made a little taco bar and we left it a mess. We didn't clean anything, frosty machines up and
Now, a lot of these signs speak for themselves, but the reason for these signs are truly what's happened in the past 2 years. Countless minimum wage workers were deemed essential. They were labeled essential and put directly in harm's way. Simultaneously, their employers were getting exponentially richer. Workers and employers are seeing that this labeling of workers as essential is inevitably leading to the better treatment and the higher pay and shorter work weeks for those workers. So in the next part, we'll talk about political consciousness, which is often what turns frustration at work or frustration at your situation into an act of protest, an organized act of protest.
Well, I was looking through a magazine here a while back, and it's showing conditions down south, where I come from, and all around there in McAlester, Oklahoma, the state penitentiary there. They have what they call chain gangs. All the southern prisons do. I guess all of them do everywhere. Anyway, I was looking at all these pictures, and I saw a line of boys. They was laying out in the sun, just completely exhausted from making big uns out of little uns. And big chain. The biggest thing in the picture was a chain. It was around one of the boys' legs, and it ran around all the boys' legs, and the chain had, what I could count there, about 6 links, 6 big links between every man. So I just got to thinking what each one of them links could stand for, and I made that this year song called Chain Around My Leg. Nothing to lose but the chain.
Political consciousness. I've explained how the working class is simultaneously a vulnerable and powerful group. So in this section, I want to explain how political consciousness can help focus the needs of the working class. Since solidarity among the working class is necessary to organize and affect the right kind of change, a sort of baseline of political ideas are necessary here. During Woody Guthrie's time, he experienced, countless different events that changed the political landscape. Some of these include the Great Depression, the Jim Crow era, and the rise of fascism. So Woody's family was, one of the victims of the Great Depression, and this affected him politically. It made him charged in a way that he wanted to support anyone who was kind of going through it. He had immense compassion for the poor, and we see this in a lot of his lyrics and a lot of the things he did during his career. Woody Guthrie was also highly critical of Jim Crow. He condemned it as just another form of slavery. He just had no tolerance for racism. His anti-racist views were probably inspired by Woody Guthrie's sort of political disagreements with his father. He really wanted to be the opposite of his dad. His dad was this, businessman tycoon who bought up all this land, and his dad was actually a member of the KKK during the time of the Black Wall Street massacre in Tulsa. For someone from Oklahoma at the time, Woody Guthrie was strangely progressive. There's all these stories about, how he would act differently than Dust Bowl refugees at the time. There's one story about him being invited to an event, and upon seeing the segregated tables, he began flipping the tables and then left the event. Woody also made it really clear in his music and in his political column, Woody says that there would be no progress for the working class without getting rid of segregation. And of course, you can't talk about Woody Guthrie without talking about fascism. So this sticker, you've probably seen it everywhere. Woody Guthrie popularized it. He had it slapped on his guitar. He would carve it into his different instruments. I think there's even a banjo that he had carved this into. Around the time of World War II, Woody became super charged up about anti-fascism and just defeating Hitler. He made a whole slew of war songs, and they really capture an interesting point in history where the war has not been won yet, and we're not, no one's 100% sure about what's going to happen, but there's this really strong rallying force against the war effort. In these songs Woody made about the war, he would not only write about the soldiers, but he would write about the workers back home who are working in the factories, producing for Uncle Sam. And we can see that, like, even no matter what topic Woody was thinking about, workers' rights were always important to him, and they were always mentioned. In an article by John S. Partington, he contextualizes Woody Guthrie's political thoughts and describes it as simple humanism. I like this definition. I'm not sure if I totally agree with everything he wrote in the article, but I think it's a good describer of Woody Guthrie. He was someone who just had a lot of compassion for those around him. He cared about the working class. He cared about racial equality. He cared about, just those who are going through a tough time. This shows up in his music all over the place, and I think this is sort of the part of that baseline political ideology that workers' movements are looking for. Like anything in history, there are a ton of takeaways we can have from this. I think the main ones, however, are Woody Guthrie's anti-racist, anti-fascist ways and his just compassion for people going through a tough time. And just being aware of certain issues can make a world of difference, I believe. Political consciousness and knowing about certain things can turn an unorganized, simple walkout into an organized strike or a protest. Most working class movements have a lot to gain by working together. This isn't really a crazy idea. If in the last 2 years you've seen pictures from the police brutality protests, or even if you've been to one, you've probably seen the Black Lives Matter flag. But at these protests, you've probably also seen maybe the Pride flag, or any different number of symbols or flags. This is because these movements intersect. They affect the same people, essentially. Some would even go as to argue that Pride, trans rights, and Black Lives Matter are different parts of a same movement. History teaches us so much, but today we learned that real change comes from ordinary people. Even the great men of history wouldn't get anywhere without the ordinary worker. Even Woody Guthrie wouldn't have gotten anywhere if it weren't for the Dust Bowl refugees, unions, or the different musicians that held him up. First of all, I want to thank you all for getting this far in the video. I was so happy with the reaction to my first video. The views, the amount of views kind of blew me away. Right now it's approaching 400, which I never thought it would get that big. I never thought it would blow up. So at the end here, I just wanted to mention a few things I found while researching this project. One was the woodyguthrie.org. This website, which I guess is run by Nora Guthrie, his daughter, it's really not the best website. There's about one page dedicated to his biography, and they have all the lyrics for all of his songs, which was really helpful. But the rest of the website, every single other tab is just them trying to sell something, which I thought was really just, backwards for a Woody Guthrie website. And, Woody Guthrie has this famous quote where he says, "Some men rob you with a fountain pen." And now, if you go to woodyguthrie.org, you could buy a pencil for $25. So I just thought that was funny. Another thing that really struck me while researching was Woody's time in the hospital. And I think I might want to do more videos on Woody. So definitely leave a comment and let me know if you found anything in particular interesting that I could dive deeper into. But I think a deeper dive into his hospital time would be an interesting story. There's just this one picture that I found of Woody Guthrie in a wheelchair, and it just, kind of blew me away. It was kind of crazy to see that, because you always see him as the rambling man, the guy who blows in and out of town with the dust. But in this one, he's totally, he's just stuck, which is a really sharp contrast to what we think of Woody Guthrie as. So again, thank you all for watching this video. I'm planning to come out with a video a month. I'm gonna try and stick to that schedule, and hopefully I'll make some shorter videos than this one. But a video a month is my goal. So bye guys, thanks for watching.
Little Wayne.
Little Wayne.